here's the deal, guys. These group coaching sessions, um, we're going, even though many of you already have experience, we're going to have to kind of start from scratch, right? With the assumption that somebody is just getting into real estate for the first time. Now, I'm not like a guru. If you were on the webinar, you heard me say that it's true. I'm not going to pretend to say that I've done thousands of deals or whatever. Like, you know, I'm not a beginner, but I'm not a super experienced investor. That said, I have worked under companies that have done this at a high level, the kinds of deals that we're talking about with the creative side, cash deals. And I know what the internal processes of companies that are doing 50, 60, 100 deals at a time look like. Now, ideally, yes, we would all get there at some point. But in practice, as individuals, maybe you're working with your spouse, maybe you're a trio. What we have to do is just different from what a large company has to do. So what we're going to do then is we're going to start with a little bit of a mental framework for those of you just getting into this. And then time permitting, we'll also go over what your actual day-to-day process will look like when you do this. Now, I'm going to have to tell you this now. There are some assumptions that I'm going to have to make about your preferred acquisition and your preferred disposition strategy. So if you're coming out of the wholesale world, you've probably not really made the distinction between acquisition and disposition strategies, but it's really important to think of deals as your acquisition combined with the best disposition strategy. So an example of that would be you buy it cash and then you assign that contract to another investor. That's a longer way of saying wholesale. And it also doesn't bake any assumptions in with respect to the marketing that you have to do to get those deals. So whenever possible, we're going to try to refer to things with the acquisition strategy and the disposition strategy. And once you recognize that there's a split between those two, your ability to be creative goes up tremendously. When you're talking to a seller, you don't make them one offer. You don't make them two offers. You make them as many offers as the numbers can work out for you to get that deal done. Right. And so if that means making them a 0% down offer and that opens up, say, long-term renting as your exit strategy, you're going to do that. But you're also ideally going to want to offer them a cash offer that you could wholesale it at. If you say you don't want to flip it yourself, giving them these choices does a lot of work for you when it comes to helping them figure out which one they should take. And it makes them less interested in receiving other offers from other people because they feel like they've gotten all their choices from you already. So with that said, the assumption that I'm going to be making is that the acquisition strategies that you'll be prioritizing, especially based on coffee closers, because that's what we built this for, is that you'll be buying houses with seller financing or subject to. And when you buy houses subject to, there's a lot of nuance to this. And to be clear, I'm oversimplifying on everything I'm saying. When you buy houses subject to, there are sort of two main ways that can happen. One is a little bit of a hybrid where you assume their mortgage, say they're halfway through, you assume their mortgage, and then you create a note for the remaining equity that they have. That's one way to do sub two. Another main way to do sub two is to just cash them out for their equity, right? And this is going to depend on how motivated they are to work with you. So those are kinds of the two camps of sub two. So what we're doing is we're talking about seller finance, sub two where you cash out their equity, and sub two where you create a note for their equity. Those are going to be the acquisition strategies that we are prioritizing, at least in the context of these group coaching sessions. Now, that doesn't foreclose your ability to do other acquisition strategies, and it should not. It's just that we don't have the capacity to talk about everything, at least not in these group coaching environments. We can, however, talk about those in your office hours. And to the extent that I can help you do these kinds of things, I will, right? And the same is true for Ariel and Liam. But, I'm just putting that out there. We're focused on those acquisition strategies. Now, for the dispo strategies, I'll say that, probably we're going to focus on, I would say maybe three. One is long-term renting, right? You all, whether or not you've ever been a landlord, kind of get what that's like intuitively because you've likely at some point rented or know someone who has. And in a lot of ways, that's a simple strategy to set up. Another strategy we're going to be focusing on is lease options, or sometimes they're called lease purchases. That's where basically you're running a rent to own program. And so you find people who have been neglected by the financial institutions who are worthy of being homeowners from a credit perspective. Not a credit perspective, but from a financial perspective, but maybe that's not reflected in their credit, right? And so examples of this would be entrepreneurs who maybe don't report all their taxes to the government. And so on paper, they're not making as much as the banks want them to see. This could be, people that just got out of a divorce, right? And maybe they don't want to, whatever. There's all kinds of people that this could fit. Another profile for this is felons, right? So if you haven't noticed, our society doesn't treat felons super well. And one of the ways that kind of hurt them is like they run the risk of losing their ability to be homeowners. And so this will be up to your personal preference. But when I do a rent to own program, I'm willing to work with people who have nonviolent felonies, because if somebody had some drug crimes 20 years ago, that ought not prevent them from being a homeowner now, right? And so that's obviously going to be a subjective judgment with how much you're comfortable with, how low their credit score can be that you're still comfortable with. But that said, you're still going to be doing your background check. You're still going to be doing your credit check, your income check. You're still going to screen them as though they were any other tenant. So that's another exit strategy. And the benefit to that exit strategy, and we'll be getting into these details at some other point, is that you get money up front and you can put that towards the down payment you're offering the seller. So, and the rule of thumb here is that you basically can offer up to 10% down on that property and expect to come out of pocket nothing, and keep whatever the distance is between how much you get from your tenant buyer. That's what we call the lease option tenants, and what you have to give to the seller. So that's the lease option strategy. And we'll talk far more in detail about what that looks like in practice. Another strategy we'll be talking about is potentially short-term rentals. So short-term rentals, I'll just say this, on average, you can expect to make about 2 to 3 times as much cash flow. Now, that's not your net income. I don't want to tell you you're going to make, money hand over fist with the short-term rental, but dollar for dollar, a comparable long-term rental and a short-term rental is going to make 2 to 3 times as much that you get to walk away with every month. So that's a great way to squeeze cash flow out. And all of these strategies are going to be very dependent on your personal goals, right? How much you want to achieve in real estate, what net worth you're going for, what cash flow you're going for. And there's a couple of other strategies. There's twists on these. We could talk about wholesaling lease options, right? I wouldn't do it, but that's a means for you to be able to make these offers to sellers that are really nice, that they're likely to accept, and be out of the deal quickly. So those are kinds of the exit strategies that we'll be talking about. And you'll notice that these are all, for the most part, long-term strategies, right? So if you were on the webinar and I told you there's a way to skip the stair-step approach of do a few wholesale deals, take that money, roll that into flips, take that money, roll into buying properties, take that money, roll it into commercial and syndication. This is what I'm talking about. You can skip straight to the point of home ownership with the similar kinds of resources that one would have if they were a wholesaler. So that's the overall where we're going with everything. All right. So with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about what I'm calling the roadmap, and I'll publish this for you guys after the group coaching call that we have here. But basically, this is a list of kind of like first steps to prime yourself for what you're going to be doing on a daily basis. And then we'll talk about what you're going to be doing on a daily basis. Hopefully by the end of this, depending on whether or not you have open questions, you might even at this point feel comfortable to get started from not having any experience whatsoever. So the first step, and I can't encourage you guys to do this enough, is to identify your local real estate clubs. So you have this course, right? This is great for, learning specific things that, and networking with each other. But your local real estate club is where you're going to get your locally legal contracts. We're going to get your locally legal title companies. It's where you're going to be able to take cheap classes that allow you to ride along to go see deals that people are doing. And like as they're happening. So the way that you can find these groups is there's the large association called the Real Estate Investor Association. And in most major cities, there's a club, and it might be called, for my case, my local club is called Central Florida Real Estate Investors Association. In my particular club, the general meetings have on average like 300 people there. And most of the people that go to these meetings are new to real estate. They're in the same position that you may be in. And so it's a really great place to meet your local connections, get to know the local vendors that you're going to be using. So that's step one. Identify your local real estate club. And if you can, go to maybe the next 3 meetings. So that's step one. The next is, and this will depend on how much context you already have, is to familiarize yourself with the basic terminology and structure of a seller finance deal, specifically seller finance. And the reason for that is that most versions of these creative financing strategies are based on seller financing. That's the core of most of these strategies. And the concepts that you learn when you learn seller financing apply in every creative deal. So I'm going to be providing a glossary of some of these terms, at least the way I define them. And you can read through that. And then if you come across a term or a definition that you're thinking like, oh, I don't understand what that means, I need to ask that as a question, then you can come to office hours and I can help you work through that. Next, determine your cash flow goals, right? So how much money you need to make for a few different potential points. How much money do you need to make that you could survive off of if you had to? It wouldn't be comfortable, but you could survive off of that, right? Determine that number. Is that the combined salary for you and your spouse? Is that just your salary, right? If you're currently working a day job, what's the amount of money that you need every month to survive, pay your basic bills? Then a kind of live comfortably cash flow goal, right? So that's you being able to do nice things and but not live luxuriously. And then figure out your live luxuriously cash flow goal, right? So calculate all those separately. And what we're going to be doing is, if you're trying to put together an action plan for how you're going to get there, you need to know what you're aiming for. And so figure out what those goals are. Next, try to determine your net worth goals, right? So this is different from your cash flow goal, but it's what you'd like to achieve with respect to how much wealth you create for yourself and your dependents, right? And it's different from your cash flow goal, right? You might be making, let's say, $5,000 a month in cash flow, but your net worth is in the millions because those houses that you're owning that are producing that cash flow for you are eventually going to be worth the full value of a house. And, let's say they're long-term rentals, right? Long-term rentals, let's say they average maybe $500 a month in cash flow. That means that it'll take you 10 houses to get to $5,000 a month. Well, in 30 years of owning 10 houses, you're going to own 10 houses outright in the value for whatever amount of time it is in the future that you own those outright. So your net worth will be substantially higher than the cash flow at the time. All right. Next, we're going to form our timelines, right? So now that we know what our cash flow goal is and our net worth goal is, let's come up with a timeline for how soon we'd like to achieve each one. How soon are you looking to achieve your survival goal, your comfortable goal, and your luxurious goal? It's just helpful to have this in your head because many people don't think about this. And it just gives you a sense of knowing how close or far you are from your goals. The next is to try to understand your resources in your specific context. So if you were on the webinar, I said that there were 2 kinds of situations that one might be in. The first that I named was maybe you're a super wealthy, high net worth individual that you just want to, but your money's all in a savings account. You don't have it in investments that you're happy about. And you want to deploy that money as quickly as you can to multiply your net worth. In that case, you might not care about something like cash flow, right? So your cash flow goal might be quite low because you're already living comfortably. But your net worth goal might be pretty high. That's one situation. The other situation is that maybe you are basically completely broke and you're not making enough every month to survive and you're going into debt. That is kind of the other extreme, but you might only be interested in cash flow, right? Your net worth in 15 years isn't something that's on your radar. Cash flow is your only priority. And there are strategies that you should prioritize if that's the case, right? Not all of these strategies produce an equivalent amount of cash flow. So that's part of understanding your resources. The next resource to understand is how much time you have. How much time can you commit to actually doing real estate? Do you have an hour a day? Do you have 2 hours a day? Can you focus on it full time? If you can focus on it full time, does that potentially put your family's life situation at risk? So that's another resource to figure out. How much time can you dedicate to this process? How much money do you have to invest in this? I'm not going to lie to you guys and tell you that everyone stands an equal shot of getting these deals. If you have money, you're going to have an easier time buying houses because you'll have more money that you can put into down payments, right? The number one objection that you're going to be getting from sellers when you start making them these creative offers is how much are you going to put down? Now, there are exit strategies like lease options that will allow you to put down up to 10%. And that's substantial, right? That tends to, you'll find sellers who will say yes to that. But man, if I had access to capital when I started doing this, I probably would have bought 5 or 10 more houses that year. So having money helps. And maybe you don't have it personally, but you know how to get it. So just try to think about, like, are there any strings I can pull to potentially give myself some starting capital for getting into my investment business? But you don't need to necessarily have that. But if you don't have any money, you're going to have to pay that back with respect to your time, right? If you have neither time nor money to do real estate, you're going to have a hard time. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that you're not. Like, that's something you have to have one of those two at least. Are you limited to investing remotely, right? If you're in an area that maybe the real estate economics don't work normally, you might have to invest remotely, and that should change your process for how you do this. I'm not sure exactly how it will change your process, but it will. So just be aware of that as a potential limitation. Finally, what other informational sources outside of coffee closers, outside of these group coaching calls, do you think you have access to? Are there reliable sources of information that you can lean on for how to do these deals? Just think about whether or not you have that. All right. And the last thing we're going to do is, once we've done all those things, we're going to create an action plan, right? We're going to come up with a series of time-based goals on how much cash flow we'd hope to have by a certain point, and whether or not we're on track to our goals, and how we're going to achieve getting that cash flow incrementally. And this is really hard to do without experience. If you have no experience, you don't have any frame of reference for how much goes into finding a deal. And that can be hard to do, but that's the mental framework. Okay, so those are the things that you'll have to do if you want to prepare your mind for what you are going to need to do. And the biggest part of that, honestly, is probably joining those local real estate groups and maybe familiarizing yourself with the basics of how seller finance works. Because when you get out there and you start making offers and going to appointments, people are going to be asking you questions that you need to have answers for. And so you need to be, you're not necessarily a subject matter expert, but you need to be able to cover most of the kinds of questions people are going to be asking you. And we'll go over some of these common objections that sellers might have in other group coaching sessions. But, expect that you should spend a good amount of time initially learning if you're starting from scratch. All right. So now I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the day-to-day life of a creative real estate investor. And again, this is assuming my acquisition and exit strategies, and exclusively those. Things will be different if you do other stuff. But the first step is to find properties, right? It doesn't matter what properties you're finding. You just have to find them. Because if you have a property, then you can do the deal analysis. And that's the next step. So luckily with Coffee Closers, we've made that pretty easy for you. We find the properties and do the initial deal analysis, and then show you which ones are most likely to be good deals from top to bottom. But you're going to have to do this regardless of whether or not you use Coffee Closers. So finding the properties, getting a source for that. Zillow works well in most states, but you can use Coffee Closers. And when you do this deal analysis, what you're trying to do is determine what the best acquisition strategy is and what the best disposition strategy is. And these things are all going to depend on what the seller wants and is comfortable with. So you're going to be doing this deal analysis, and then you're scheduling and attending appointments. And that's where most of your time is scheduling and attending appointments. The way that I'll be walking you guys through how to do deals does not involve marketing to motivated sellers. We're doing on-market deals here. And because we're doing that, we don't need to worry about getting the right phone number. We don't need to worry about following up with somebody 15 times before they let us have an appointment. You can basically spend 10 minutes after this call scheduling appointments, and your entire day tomorrow going to appointments with realtors. So we're cutting out a lot of the initial steps that normally go into starting a real estate business by focusing on these on-market appointments. So scheduling these appointments and attending them. That's where your bottleneck is going to be most of the time. There's always going to be more appointments than you have time to take. And it's always better to go on a bad appointment than no appointment at all. So that's what you're going to be spending most of your time in. The next is going to be drafting these letters of intent and or contracts, depending on what the realtor wants or the seller wants. So for those that don't know, the letter of intent is simply it's like a letter that in layman's terms explains what you're wanting to do with the property and how your offer is going to come across. And it's a good precursor, especially to creative deals that are complicated, for getting the seller to understand what it is that you're offering them. And so it does a little bit of priming for you so that when you're talking to that seller for the first time, you're not having to explain absolutely everything to them. So drafting, sending those letters of intent and contracts. Now, until you get a seller that says yes, those things that I just said, that's all you're going to do. Find properties, do your deal analysis, schedule 10 appointments, send letters of intent and offers. You're doing that over and over and over and over for as much time as you can commit to your business. And then someone's going to say yes. And once they say yes, that opens up another series of steps. We don't have to get into what that is now, but that's basically the remainder of executing the deal, right? That's getting the paperwork delivered to the title company. That's finding your tenant to get them placed before you close. That's marketing for your tenant. That's, executing your contract. That's, following up on the other offers. Like that's a later sort of step. But for many of you to get your first deal, you're just going to be finding properties, running the numbers, sending them offers over and over. That's what you should be focusing your time on. Obviously network and learn stuff, go to webinars, read books, go to your local real estate club. But that doesn't account for that much relative amount of your day-to-day life as an investor. So that's the 10,000-foot view of what creative finance real estate investing looks like. I want to also inoculate you guys against a bad misconception that I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you don't disqualify appointments unless you have a better appointment to go on. So everything is a balance of your time and your resources. When you disqualify an appointment, you think, oh, I'm $10,000 off with the seller, it's never going to work out. That is not correct. It's just not. And you'll learn that with experience. When you get to that appointment and you're sitting at the kitchen table with the seller and you've asked them why they're selling the house and they're telling you why they're motivated to sell this house to you, that's when the real story comes out. Everything that you see on the MLS, on Zillow, when you have your initial phone calls to them, before you're standing in front of them and shaking their hand, that's an illusion. That they're trying to play the game of negotiation with you. They're putting up these defenses that are not actually real, right? They're showing you only the photos they want you to see. They're showing you the price that they hope that you'll say yes to, but they don't necessarily need you to say yes to. When you get there and you start talking to them, you're going to find out what the actual story is and what they actually need. So don't disqualify appointments unless you've got a better appointment to go on. It's better to go on 5 bad appointments than no appointments at all. So if you think that you're wasting your time, just try it, and you'll notice that once you get to the house, the story changes. So that's my spiel. And I know that was a lot of context, and I listed a bunch of steps, and I'm sure a lot of you guys wrote some of these down, but I'm going to be providing this whole thing as a list for you. that you can look at and read over. But yeah, that's what we're doing, guys. You're going to familiarize yourself with the basic concepts, and then you're going to start running numbers and going to appointments. And that's it. That's the core of what we're doing. All right. I'm going to leave some time for questions and answers. We're still figuring out how exactly we're going to divide our time here, but we will be going over some basic concepts as well. I know that I completely left that off the table, but that's where we're starting. Looks like Martin asked, are templates for letter of intent state dependent, or can I just fire up a Google Drive and write it all out? They are not state dependent, sort of. So there might be some states that I'm unfamiliar with where you can't do, for whatever reason, a sub-2 deal. I don't think that's the case, but the letter of intent itself isn't a legal document. It's a letter of intent. And so it's just explaining in plain English what you want to do. And then the contract that you use formalizes that. And so when you have that contract, that's where it's state dependent, because there's going to be regulations that you have to follow for your specific state, and it's not a kind of categorical thing. Now, we will be going over real contracts that I've used, going through the contract, looking at the paperwork, showing how it aligns with the deal structure. So that'll be for a different day. But you can't use the contract that I'm giving you unless you really want to take that risk. You should really get your own contracts that have been reviewed by an attorney local to you. And how you get these contracts, go to a real estate club. I can guarantee you that every real estate club has a couple of people doing what we're doing now. And they have contracts that they've used in the past that have been executed by local title companies that have been reviewed by attorneys. Even if you have to pay them for it, say, $200, just send me your paperwork. I need something that's legally binding in this state. They'd be happy to do that. These real estate clubs, the people there really do want you to succeed. Dan asks, LOIs are same or different than the offer letter? Offer letter. Yeah. I tend to say it's the same, right? So the letter of intent is the same as your offer letter. But you're going to follow it up when they say, yeah, I'm interested in this, with your actual contract that puts these terms into writing that they sign on the dotted line with. It's vernacular here. And honestly, it doesn't even matter to them whether or not we call it a letter of intent. When I talked earlier about the balance of time, there are, I guess, 2 steps here that are interchangeable. You can either send that letter of intent before the appointment or after. If you have an unlimited amount of time, you should send it. You should go to the appointment as often as you can, because if you use these letters of intent as a means to try to disqualify what you think are bad appointments in advance, you're just going to leave deals on the table, because until you're talking to that person and you've shaken their hand, their defenses are still up. And so if you go to every appointment you can, you're going to run the highest likelihood of getting a deal, versus just sending them a letter of intent. However, that's not feasible for many of us. We have to disqualify deals a little bit because maybe we're really far away from our target market. In those situations, you're probably going to have to send a letter of intent first, and then only entertain seriously the ones that bite, because it's much more expensive for you, both in your time and your money, to actually go do your due diligence at the house. In general, you won't have an agent representing you. Now, there could be value to that. For example, on a vacation to visit my parents, I connected with a local agent and I said, hey, here's our buying box. We'll go to any appointment you can bring us to. And over like 3 days, we went to 8 appointments, just driving around Atlanta, seeing these different houses. There's value to that. The problem with agents, though, is that has to come out of the buyer's commission in most states. I'm sorry, the buyer's proceeds. So when an agent gets involved, that lowers the amount that the buyer's or the seller's going to make at the end of the day after closing, because part of that down payment that you're making them has to go to pay off their agent representing them. So you'll be communicating with the seller through their agent for on-market deals for the most part, unless you stick to for sale by owners, in which case you'll just be interfacing directly with the seller. The value agents provide are things that we're willing to do ourselves as investors, right? They're willing to draft up contracts for us. They're willing to, deal with the title company for us. That that might be helpful for those that aren't willing to learn about real estate. But for us, we're willing to do our share and work with the agents directly. And so we don't need to have our own agent. And even if we did, it would make the deal worse, at least for the seller. So the real estate clubs tend not to have any kind of connection to the title companies. What tends to happen is that the title companies will go and become sponsors or vendors at these clubs. And so at large clubs, what happens is you'll have a list of sometimes an actual room full of vendors. And that's where you'll be able to meet lenders, title companies, contractors, title attorneys, anything that you might care about as a real estate investor. And when you create that relationship with them, it's just you and them directly. The real estate club itself isn't involved. But the real estate club's a great way to find them. And by going in person, if you can, you're filtering out the ones that aren't a good match, right? Title companies, it tends to be a very traditional process. It's legally intensive. And you don't want to get a bad title company that doesn't know how to run a lease option deal. And title companies that advertise themselves as investor-friendly title companies, they're the ones you need to work with. You can't just find your local title company and expect that they'll know how to process create a finance deal. Title companies tend not to like that. Some states don't have title companies with the term, like as that term. They have real estate attorneys, and real estate attorneys will do that, drafting up contracts for you. But the truth is, you should probably just learn how to create a contract yourself, not create it from scratch. You're obviously going to need to find a contract that's been used, but the details that change between them, that's something you can control, right? So you're changing out the address, the seller's name, the buyer's name, right? Those are things that you don't need to be a lawyer to make modifications to. So the title company will be able to provide you potentially with a template contract that you can use. And that's actually a good source to get those, by the way. So you don't need to necessarily just get that from an investor. If you find an investor-friendly title company, you can ask them, do you have any contract templates that you can share with me? And they're usually happy to oblige because they want your business later.